Hi, buddy. We've arrived at the end where we're having to worry about glazing our work. You should have gotten your bisque back from the pot drop-off down at school. And this past week, I'm hoping you got 2 buckets of glaze and a little container of wax, okay? We're going to need those to glaze your work. And before we get going, we need to do a little prep work on your bisque. So the kilns can be a dusty place and your work may have gotten exposed to a lot of dry dust and things, might have settled on your work. And to take care of that, we squeeze all the water out of a sponge that we can. And we'll just go over this and it just takes off any loose debris. I don't want it to get soaking wet because our glazes are water-based and the pot needs to stay porous so it can absorb the glaze into the body of the pottery. So we would set this aside 5 minutes or so, let it just lose a little of that moisture. And the next step is our wax. You've got a little container of wax. I think they was pink. Comes in different colors. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. What it does is it resists the glaze from sticking to our pot. You got a small amount of wax and it's got to last you for all your work. So it is concentrated and you should be able to add at least the same amount of water as wax. That'll cut it by 50%, okay? So that should get you through our glazing part. Don't spill. And so I've got here my foot. Now the reason we have to wax every foot on every pot is it sits on a kill shelf that's as like a stone in the kiln. And if we get any glaze onto the bottom of the pot, it could stick our pot to the shelf. That can damage the shelf, and it definitely damages your pot because we take a chisel and a hammer to pop them off of there, and they don't always survive that process. So here I'm going. I've got a wax. This is a wax, my wax brush, and I very carefully I'm holding it in one hand and I'm going around. Okay, now, and I have to go up the sides of the pot, and especially because most of you are unfamiliar with glazes, you're going to want to go up from the bottom of the foot at least 1/4 of an inch. And if your design allows it, for instance, the foot of my pot can easily be all waxed. And there I go. Okay, and the other thing is I'm going to need to do the inside of the foot too, wherever I don't want any glaze to remain after I glaze this pot. Now, the beauty of the wax product is that after it dries, we can dip this pot into glaze, and then we don't have to laboriously clean the foot. If you forget to put wax on, you're still going to have to clean the foot of your pot off of all that wax before we can fire it. And
Glaze.
it is, what?
Clean it off of all the glaze.
Yeah, what'd I say?
Wax.
Wax, yeah. We want to clean all the glaze off of there. Thank you. And don't underestimate what a chore it is if you blow it, okay? So, here we go. this this guy was waxed, and it is dry to the touch, okay? And so I know that it's going to resist the glaze just fine. Also, if you try and do this, like you're in a hurry and the wax is wet, you're going to get the wax on your fingers, and every place you touch the pot will leave waxy finger marks. So, yeah, no good, not good at all. So what are we going to do here? You got 2 buckets of glaze, right? And when you get them, they'll probably have settled a little bit. And get a spoon or something, a little spatula, and vigorously stir that up. We don't want any bunches of glaze to be stuck around the edges of the bottom, because all the minerals, all the chemicals that are in this, we want to be in suspension, because that's what makes the color and textures of our glaze, all right? So that's looking pretty good. Now I use the lid to keep my glaze from getting everywhere. You have 2 buckets of glaze, and you don't want to get any of this glaze into your other bucket of glaze, all right? Contamination is something we always have to worry about. Now, for your pinch pots, this bucket, I think, is going to be small enough for us to just do a dipping process. We can pour glazes and we can dip them, and if we have to, we can paint them, but it's a real pain in the keister, and it's a last resort for this kind of a glaze. So, holding on to my waxed area with my fingers, okay, I'm going to go down in, give it a shake, 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 flip it over, and if you see on the inside, there's an area that didn't get glazed. So then what I want to do is, well, I've got my fingers on there. I have a bucket of water that I use to clean my fingers off. You can see already how the glaze goes powdery dry, and once it dries, if you have dry hands, you can touch it without getting glaze on your fingers. So, next step is to pour. Okay, so I got another container, and I'm just going to pour that in, and then I'm going to quickly go around while dumping out. Now I've got a little bit of a mark there where I've got an overlap of the glaze, so if that bothers you and you don't like it, like this drip here, when it dries, we can finger sand it. Just take your finger and go over it. There'll be a little dry powdery substance, and you shouldn't have any problem. Now, notice I dipped my foot completely in that glaze, and I have just a little bit of glaze here that I can easily take off. See how clean that is? That's how we'd like it. Nice and clean. If you happen to bring them in, your pots, and they are not cleaned on the bottom of the foot, we usually put them on a little clay chip called a cookie, and when that glaze melts, it gets stuck to the cookie forever. So it's not a great thing. So here I am trying to just sand that out a little bit using my finger. Again, another real tedious thing, so hopefully you won't get too bogged down with an urge for perfection. This will work better when it dries a little more, okay? So that was dipping and pouring just one glaze. Got another guy over here. And so here what we want to do maybe is we're going to want one color on the inside and a different color on the outside, okay? So every time we come back into this bucket of glaze, we stir it, okay? Because the heavier particles will settle, even if we're away for just a few minutes. Okay, so I got my material. Just gonna go around that and see how we do here. Shake, shake, shake. Okay, now this time I'm going to want a little different look on the outside. I don't want any of the glaze that is on the inside to show. So I'm holding it onto one hand, onto the foot. And so that's the other thing. If you put feet on your pinch pots, you're going to be very pleased with yourself. It's so much easier to hang on to. Okay, so right now then I have just the inside glaze is just on the top rim. That'll be fine. And then now I'm going to pour glaze on the outside of this pot, if I can. Again, the things that I've been using in this glaze stay there unless I want to clean them off completely before I start on a different glaze. Also, when you change over to a different glaze, put the lid back on so you don't accidentally get one glaze into another. Contamination is something we're always trying to fight against. So I have another container here, and this is my exterior glaze, okay? And I'm just going to dip it straight down in. Shake, shake, shake. And then I kind of got to hang on to it a little before I can flip it over. And I wait for it to dry. If the pot is thick, it can absorb more glaze than if it's thin. So when you glaze a pot, where it's thin, it'll stay wet a lot longer than where it's thick. And you just have to realize that that's physics. Now I've got these little bubbles around my coil. That'll be fine. That'll melt. I don't need to worry too much about that. So what I'm going to do next is, as soon as it dries, now it's dried just enough so I can clean the foot off. And this foot, you know, I did wax that right at the beginning of the movie, real time. So that's about all it takes. And so just a sponge and go over it. If on the inside you had a glaze where you didn't like, you could use your fingernail if it's long enough, or your needle tool. Okay. So now I'm going to set it aside just a little bit. What I wanted to do is, well, maybe I can get that done here. I want to wax this now. And I can wax over a glaze, and that will help me to get a different color. I want a different color on my coil here. Okay, so I'm going to be waxing this for a little while. Okay, so I've got it all waxed, and what the result I'm hoping is for me to get my band here and some of these dots to be green while I'll have a different color on the underside. Now, you can see the wax is still a liquid here. I'm going to set it aside to dry a little bit longer. And I have my cat head rattle here. And what I wanted to show you was I got its air hole here, right? We'll need to cover that up while we glaze him so your rattles don't get glazed down. You don't want any glaze to get on the inside, so get yourself a little pinch wad, technical term, and then when we're done glazing, we'll pick that off with the needle tool, right? But what I wanted to show you was, if this is my, and by the way, you're going to be messing around with your rattles and they may not sit right? So use a towel to keep it from bouncing off the floor. Okay. And also, let me show you, my rattle does not sit flat. It rolls around. So it would be a danger to anybody's work that was next to it. It might roll into it and it gets stuck together. So I'm going to have to put my rattle head on its base like so. It'll be glazed together, or I can wax the bottom line and the rattle and get rid of it. But because it doesn't sit all by itself, I'm just going to incorporate its little donut as part of the piece. It'll be a base like so. And so to make this work, I'm going to want to I don't need to wax this because it's going to be completely glazed, but I'm going to have to wax my donut and probably put wax halfway up the outside, halfway up the inside, so it doesn't stick together. Okay, and pencil burns out. So we would just go ahead and wax this guy. By the way, you do not want any drips from your wax to go rolling down the side of your pot, because we can't undo that. And so it's just going to become part of your design. So what that means is, don't press really hard on your brush when you put it onto the work, and be very cognizant of how much liquid is in your brush to avoid that. It's the most common disaster on glaze days. Wax where you don't want it. Okay, I got to set that aside. One of the things I wanted to bring to your attention is, if I want one of the eyes on this cat to be a different color, I'm going to have to use the wax, and I've got a brush here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint glaze onto my eye. And because glazes aren't like paints, you can't just combine two different glazes and get a third predictable color. Red and blue will not make purple. So we have to mask one glaze from another so it doesn't interact. because the combination of the two of them can, oh yeah, so you're going to need to put more than one coat on. And if I can, I like to put it on one way and then I put this glaze on another. And so then what? Then I'll wax these eyes, and then when I dip the whole piece, I'll have a different eye color from everything around it. And if you go over the line just a little, at this point, you can use a sponge to just clean that edge up, depending on your standards. Okay, so there's that, and then I would go over that. With my wax. Okay, so I'm not gonna just stand here and wax all video. That's that. But I wanted to show you another situation that comes up. Here's another rattle, but it doesn't have any base for it. So, but it sits pretty well just like that. So I'm going to put it in the kill like that, but I am going to have to wax part of the base. And so I'm looking down at the bottom and I spun it around, and if I wax in this area, I should be more than clear for any glaze strips and such that stick us down. Okay, so that would look like that. And again, we put it aside to dry. Now, I wanted him to keep rattling, so I had to stick all his spit wads in. And so what I'm going to do, he's going to get glazed, then his little eye bands will be waxed, and so they'll be a different color than the rest of them. Well, I can even do that now. Okay, so here we are back at it. We've been waxing our pots. Here's my first bowl. You can see now that glaze coming off of there with just the edge of my nail, very carefully. So if those drips bother you, can do this. I don't think it's necessary, but sometimes I've been known to resort to that. So another thing you can do with your wax is you could paint it right on your pot for making a design by resist. So I'm going to dip that into a different glaze, and I should have some nice colors. And one thing we do need to, there's one more way. If you have a piece of work that's too big for your buckets to dip in, then you're going to have to pour glaze on the outside, all right? So in this case, I am going to first glaze the inside with my pouring method.
And you don't want to let it sit in there for too long, do you?
No. So the way that this glazing works is that our pot has been fired so it's hard enough so that we can handle it without it cracking or breaking too easily in our hands. But it's still absorbent enough to pick up glaze from the bucket. So if you were to put it in there and leave it in there, that the whole time you were in there, your pot would be sucking glaze out of the container. You'd have way too much glaze. And so what happens when you get too much glaze on there, and we haven't really talked about, is that it can run off the pot. So too much glaze is something you really do need to worry about. Okay, so now if we come over here, I have a bucket of glaze, and what I'm doing is I'm just pouring. I can probably just pour right over. Yeah, I could just pour right here. And I just go from one side to the other. Shake, shake, shake. Okay. And then we have one glaze on the inside and a different glaze on the exterior. Okay. Now, we got this guy that we're going to try and okay. So I'm just going to push it down. And it's stuck in some places, but not in others. And so I will be able to go over that with slightly moistened sponge and pick all that up. Okay. When the pot has an inside dry, a finger on the inside, a finger on the foot, it can allow you to pick things up without screwing up the outside. I'm just going to dip this guy once. So we have bare clay in our glaze, and I can go ahead and do something different on the bottom half or just leave it. Very mysterious. Okay, So that's probably enough to get you started. Now, when you're finished with your glazing session, scrape the edges of your glazing bucket, keep them clear. Otherwise, glaze will dry up on this rim, and the next time you open it up, the dried bits will fall in, fouling things up. For your container of wax, if you don't have an enclosable lid, use saran wrap and a rubber band to keep it tight against the air. Don't want it to dry out, it can. If it does dry out, you can just add a little water. 6 or 8 hours, it should soften up. So, okay. Good luck, and I will be posting some other videos from my boss on the site. Oh, I forgot this one guy to do here. Hang on. Let's see if... Oof, now you can tell that this wax is not quite dry, but you know, I'm in a hurry anyway, so let's see what we can do. And because it's so wet, it didn't really resist as well as I'd like. So now I'll have to go over that with a slightly damp sponge and clean it off, which I should be able to do pretty easy, but this is a case where, yeah, just put them down, come back later. Okay. Very good. Okay, good luck. Have fun. Try not to be too uptight. I know it's a natural part of the process, but have fun.